Hi, you're with Chandeep at Goodly once again, and in this video I'm going to talk about that how can you select measures using a slicer. Now this isn't something new that we're going to talk about. I've already spoken about this particular technique in the past two videos, and those were how can you build a slicer to select measures, and another one was dynamic line charts. If you haven't checked out those videos, I suggest that you check out those videos as well. Now, the problem in the last technique, which is where I talked about this same approach, was that the ability to create a slicer which contains all the measures was manual. That means you manually had to write all the names of the measures. That was problem number one. The other problem was that whenever you're selecting a particular measure from a slicer, the display in the visual could only be for a single measure. You can't really select more than one measure. In this video, I'm going to actually talk about a technique using Tabular Editor and calculation groups that how can you get around that particular problem. It's going to be quite useful and equally fun. Let's start. All right, I'm in Power BI and that's where I have set up everything. Let's just do a quick demo and a tour of the data model before we start to build everything from scratch. Real quick, I have simple data model right here, three tables, the calendar table, the products table, and the sales table, all connected through a one-to-many relationship, nothing that complicated. What I have done is I have actually created two or three measures right here. So one is transactions, the total units and total sales, and those three measures now appear in a slicer. And depending upon what I select in the slicer, I can actually see that in my pivot table right here. Now, if I happen to select, let's say, total units, I get to see total units, transactions, I get to see transactions, or if I happen to select two of them, maybe total units and transactions, I get to see not only just one, but perhaps two or even three of the measures together in the same output that is a pivot table. Now let's just actually take a look at how can we build something like this using a calculation group in Power BI. All right, this particular measure that you see on the screen is nothing but the result of a calculation group. Now, calculation groups are something that you cannot create in Power BI. You have to use external tools, maybe a Tabular Editor for creating a calculation group. Now, I will actually go over to the external tools ribbon and I have Tabular Editor 2 and Tabular Editor 3. Now, while I was creating this particular technique in Tabular Editor 3, it was crashing again and again, maybe some bug with my own computer, nothing to do with Tabular Editor. But for the risk of not spoiling this particular video, I'm going to use Tabular Editor 2 to be able to show this technique. So let me just open that real quick and we'll take it from there. All right, we are in Tabular Editor 2 and right now we'll start to create a calculation group. You can see that we already have a measure selector calculation group that I have created, which is showing me total sales, transactions, or units. All the individual items that you see are nothing but the items of the calculation group. Let's just actually create a new one so that you understand. I have not spoken about calculation group basics as of now on this channel, and I'll try to create a video if you're not aware about calculation groups very soon, but for now let's just take a look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the tables right here, right click, and I say that I want to create a new calculation group. A calculation group is inserted. Let's just give it a name. So I'm just going to call this as my measures. Any name is fine. And inside of this particular calculation group, we are going to create calculation items. Now, depending upon how many measures do you want to display in the slicer, you're going to create that many calculation items. For instance, currently I have three measures displayed in the slicer, and you can see that in the previous calculation group that I have created, I have these three calculated items right here. So similarly, in the new one that I have created, I'm going to create each calculation item. Now, right click here, new, create new. A calculation item. Let's just give it a name. Perhaps total sales is fine. And in that particular calculated item, I'm going to write the DAX. What is the DAX? The DAX is nothing but the reference to the same measure that we are trying to calculate. So there is no need of writing equals to, just write total, no spelling mistakes, total sales. Commit to that. And as of now, just for dummy purposes, I'm just going to create one calculation group, save it and show you how it looks. But since I want three of the measures, you're going to create the other two as well and reference the very measure inside of that particular calculation item. Let's just save it, Control S to save it. And if you go back to your Power BI, it just actually gives you that pop-up of refresh. Once you refresh, you're going to see that particular my measures created. And now I can actually build a slicer, an empty slicer. And in that particular slicer, I can actually go ahead and place this particular total sales right here. Now, let's just actually go ahead and create the rest of the two calculation groups as well. All right, Once your calculation group has been created, which I have done it manually so far, that means I have created every single calculation item by typing the name of the measure and typing the DAX code right here. I save it and I get to see that particular calculation group in my Power BI right now. Now this calculation group needs to be used in the visual. What I can actually do is I can right now, for now, remove this particular measure list of the pivot table, and I have a blank pivot table which contains the year and the month coming from the calendar table, and this is where I would like to use the new calculation group. Let me just delete that. I would like to use the new calculation group that I have created to display whatever is selected by the user. So total sales, total units, or total transactions. Now this calculation group needs to sit inside of my pivot table as well. So what do? I take that calculation group that I have created, which is my measures, and drag the name column, which I should have ideally named a better thing, but for now it's just name. I should have actually dragged this to the pivot table. Now the problem is that for now I have filled my pivot table with the year, with the month coming from the calendar table, the calculation group, but there is no values in the pivot table that actually does some calculation. Now this values measure is not going to be something significant, but I can actually create a dummy measure which does actually nothing. It could be just a random blank measure as well. So if I actually go and take a look at this blank measure, this is nothing but measure equals to 1. This is just a random thing that I have done, because this random thing is not going to be implemented. What is going to be implemented is this particular calculation group that you have created. So once you actually select the total sales right here, what this is actually going to do is, rather than actually doing the one thing, it is going to reference back to the total sales calculation which we have defined in the calculation group. Let's take a look. So this measure goes in the value section of the pivot table. It shows all the three calculation groups as of now. So total sales, total units, and transactions, because none of them have been selected as of now. But if you actually select total sales, you get to see total sales, which I need to format obviously with a 1 decimal, which I can do, total units, and total transactions. So let's just actually go ahead and try to format the total sales right here with 1 decimal back in the calculation group. So calculation group right here and total sales measure right here. In the format string, I can give it like a string to format, inverted commas open, 0.0, which is 1 decimal. I click on Control S to save this particular calculation group, and at the pivot table right here, I should actually see that effect being done. Now if you want to define the format for units or transactions, you can actually do that. It's pretty simple. Now the calculation group has been created. We have been able to make a slicer that actually displays even more than one value that you would like to see it in the visual. But the problem is that the creation of the calculation group itself was manual. That means I had to go to Tabular Editor 3, and in this particular screen, I had to create one after the other the calculation item manually. That's the problem. Can we actually find a way to automate the creation of the calculation group itself or calculation items in an automated way? Let's take a look at that. All right. In order to automate every single calculated item being created in the calculation group, what we're going to use is a C# script. Now, if you don't know it already, Tabular Editor actually provides you with an ability to write a C# script that can actually automate a lot of tasks of creating measures and doing a lot of things inside of your Power BI model. That means I can write a small piece of code using C#, and this is actually going to do a lot of things in my model. The thing that I want to do as of now is that I want to create every single calculation item. That means a calculation item called total sales. Not only that, it should also refer to its own self. Then I want to create the next calculation item, which is total units, and it should again refer to itself. So this is something that I would like to create for as many measures as I want to display in the slicer. So if in the slicer I want to display 5 measures that I have created, I should be able to do that using a C# script. So let's just see how can we do that. But before that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete all of the work that I have done, not all of the work, but some of the work that I have done. So for now, I'll just get rid of my measures calculation group, delete that. And I will also delete the initial calculation group that I created, which is where I had total sales, delete that, I had transactions, delete that, and I had total units, I delete that. Now, as of now, I just have a blank calculation group, which is nothing but the measure selector calculation group, and there are no calculated items within that. Now, I would like to be able to write a C# script that actually creates 3 calculation items, one for total sales, one for total units, and the other one for transactions. To be able to do that, I have a very simple script right here. Now note that I am no specialist in C# and this is like a brute force. I've done a lot of trial and errors and I've come up with this simple script. This script essentially is saying that I would like to edit this particular calculation group, which is the measure selector, and I was not able to select the name of the calculation group, so I used this particular property of the first. Now if you are aware of C#, I'm sure you can edit this script and make it more robust, but for now this script actually works. In this script, I'm saying that I'm going to select a few measures. So I'm going to select a few measures in Tabular Editor. And for all the measures that I have selected in Tabular Editor, why don't you create a calculation item? And every single calculation item is going to have 2 things. It's going to have a name by which it appears, and it's going to have a formula. And both of these things are mentioned right here. So measure name and the object name is going to be the reference of the same formula. Now, once you actually write this particular script, I'm going to give you a link to that and you can just copy this. You write the script, you select the 3 calculations or measures. So total sales selected, the transaction selected and total unit selected. These 3 have been selected and you hit the play button, right? Note that I'm actually working in the advanced scripting section, which is where you have the ability to write the C# script, and that's where I have copy pasted the script. Now, once the script has been pasted and the 3 measures that have been selected, you can just hit on the play button, and this is actually going to create 3 calculation items: total sales, transactions, and the units. Let's just go take a look at that. So click on that and you see total sales being referenced, click on that, transactions being referenced, and that total units being referenced. Now, I just hit Control S to save the model, and I go back and take a look at refresh now. This was the earlier calculation group. We have a new one called measure selector, which is where we have a measure list, put that in the pivot table, also put that in the slicer and the pivot table, and we have the calculation group created. The one thing that we still need to do once again was the formatting of the total sales measure, but this works pretty good. Now, this particular technique of creating a measure list and that actually affects your visual could be created by, could be used in any visual that you create. This could be a pivot table, a bar chart, a line chart, not a pie chart, but any other chart, but a pie chart. All right, that was all about it. All right, that's been it. I hope you like this one, and I'm sure this is going to be very, very useful in creating like a measure selector that allows you to select multiple measures to display in your particular visual. Let me know if you have any comments around this, and you have any questions. I'll be glad to reply. In the end, I'd like to give a sales pitch like the way that I always do it. In case you're starting out with Power BI and DAX and Power Query is something that you'd like to learn right from scratch, build up your fundamentals first, and then proceed to solve more challenging issues and problems with your own data, I'd highly recommend that you take a look at my courses. It's going to be highly beneficial. Thanks so much for sticking around, and I'll catch you very soon in the next one. Cheers.